Begin today the Gemara on Daf Samech Tes Samech Beis, 2 lines up from the bottom of the Amud where it says Amar Rava. So the Gemara here is going to bring many different cases with Piskei Dinim from Rava that Paskin, I think it's maybe 8 or 9 cases where the Gemara goes through different halachas that Rava Paskin, and it's all connected to what we learned in the Mishnah, where it speaks about the wine that was exposed to a guy, but there's a certain shmirah. The Yid is walking behind him, or the guy is afraid that even if the Yid left, the Yid may come back, and therefore there's no concern that the guy touched or poured this wine for his Avoda Zara, and it's still going to be mutter. So here there's many of such cases where Rava paskin similar that the wine will be mutter. Amar Rava Zaina. It starts actually first with halacha also connected to the Mishnah, but a little bit of a different kind of halacha. Zaina Ayvedas Kechavim. If there is a Zaina, a woman, a guy, that people have relations with her, v'Yisrael misuben etzla, and there are Yidden that are sitting and eating, having a party with her. So that means that you're talking about Yidden that are not careful with their behavior. They're hanging out with the Zaina here, and so even though there's wine there as well, that is with this Zaina, that's a guy that's there, Chamra Shari, the wine is going to be allowed. What's the reason for this? If they don't care to have a relation with this woman, with this guy, shouldn't we say that they're not going to be concerned about Yayin Nesach either, and they're going to allow her to take this wine and to pour this wine and to touch this wine? So the Gemara says, no. Even if these Yidden have a very strong Yetzirah for an Aveda, the term Aveda in Chazal is usually used for the Indian of Znus, but nevertheless, Yitzra the Yayin Nesach letakifluhu. But the Yetzirah of Yayin Nesach, to allow this guy to go and take the wine, to pour it, to use it for Avoda Zara, for that they don't have the Yetzirah, and to keep kosher, they'll still be careful of, and therefore they're not going to allow her to touch it. Right? So, which means what the Gemara is saying here is that be'emes, if you look at the levels of Avedas, the Inyan of Znus is something which is much worse than this Inyan of Yayin Nesach, the Gzeira of Chazal, Stam Yenam. It could be even a case where it's not actual Yayin Nesach. So, l'chayre, if this person is not careful with such a severe Aveda, they're not going to be careful with Yayin Nesach. But the Gemara says, Chazal know the nature of a person, that regarding the Yetzirah of Znus, there the Yetzirah is stronger, and even while a person is over on that, Kashrus, Yayin Nesach, will still be careful with. However, if the case is the opposite, Zaina Yisraelis, if this is a Yiddish woman, that's a Zaina, and there are Goyim that are having a party with her, so here, Chamra Aser, the wine is going to be Aser. My time, what's the reason? Because Hayol Vizila Alayu, since she is so degraded for them, and they're taking advantage of her, and she is under their control, she's doing whatever they want of her. Basraya Grira, she goes after them, and she's not going to open up her mouth to stop them from doing whatever they want. If they can do whatever they want with her, they'll pour the wine and do whatever they want, and she is not going to say anything. So in such a case, we're concerned that they actually poured the wine and did something which makes it Aser Bahano. Dr. Gemara, Hahu Beise, there was a house, the Havi Yosef Bei Chamre de Yisrael, there was wine of a Yid that was being stored there. So according to Rashi, and you see here some Agaitis that's actually in the Gemara, that there was wine of a Yid and wine of a guy that was stored there together. So all Oivik Echavim, that is, a guy entered into this house, and Achta L'dasha Ba'pei, and he locked the door behind him. V'have Biza B'dasha, but there was a crack in the door that you were able to see through the crack a little bit into the room. It was found that the guy was there between the barrels. So in other words, they saw through the crack that the guy is there inside this room, that he locked the door, and he's between the barrels. So what would you think is such a case? The guy is there and he locks the door behind him, so he's going to use the wine, he's going to pour the wine. It should be all Aser Ba'ana. Amar Rava, but Rava says, Kol, the Lahadi Bize, Shari. Anything that's right there across that crack that you could see in where the guy is going to be allowed. But the Haigise, but whatever is on one side or on the other side, over there, those things are not going to be allowed because you can't see what the guy is doing. Right? So Rashi over here adds the point that I mentioned before, that it's in a case where there's wine of a Yid and of a guy over here inside, because otherwise there's a svara which the Gemara is going to say a few times afterwards, that the guy is afraid to touch anything because he's afraid to be caught as a ganav. Something that's not his, we assume that the guy is afraid that he's going to be caught. But in this case, because he walked into a place where there's his barrels of wine and there's the Yid's barrels of wine there as well, so he's not afraid to be caught as a ganav. So whatever is not there, exposed in the crack in the door, we're going to be afraid that he touched, and it'll be aser. Another case where Rava Paskin, Ahu Chamre de Yisrael. There was wine of a Yid, Avi Yosef Bebeise, that was being stored in the house, in the bottom floor of the house. The Avoda Yisrael Bal Yaina. The Yid is living on the top floor, and the guy is living on the bottom floor. Now, in the house itself, even though it was in a different floor, but apparently there's an opening between the top floor and the bottom floor, and the Yid could see through from the top floor exactly what's going on the bottom floor, and there's no concern that the guy is doing anything with this wine. But what happened? One day, Shomu Kol Tigra, they heard a voice, a sound of a fight that's going on outside of the house. So Nafki, both the Yid and the guy ran out to see what's going on. And then, during the whole commotion, what happened? Kadam Asi Oivigachavim, the guy came into the house first, he came back into the house first, and Achtel Adashabah Peh, and he locked the door. And the Yid is outside. So the question is, the guy now is inside alone. Is there any concern that in this case he touched the wine and the Yid doesn't know, he doesn't see? Amar Rava, so Rava says, Chamre Shari, the wine is allowed to be used. Why? Because Meimer Amar, the guy says to himself, Kehechi, the Kadam Asai, I know, just like I ran in back into the house and I locked the door, Kadam Vasi Yisrael, the Yid maybe came in first. He didn't see that the Yid did not come in yet. Maybe the Yid came in first, V'Yosef Bal Yaina, and the Yid is sitting on the top floor, as he always is, V'Kachazili, and he sees what's going on. So as the Mefarshim point out, this psak din of Rava will only be applicable in such a kind of case, where there was a fight going on and there was a commotion, and the guy runs in with a hurry, and he didn't pay attention to see if the Yid ran in ahead of him or not. But if it's a case where they're going in calmly, and the guy knows that he came in first and the Yid is outside, then we are going to be concerned, because the wine is in the guy's house, downstairs. And in such a case, he's not afraid of nitvas olav kaganev, he's not afraid that he's going to be caught as a thief, and he may touch the wine. Another case, a third case, where Rava Paskind, Hahu Ashpized, there was this motel, the Havi Yosef Bechamre de Yisrael, where there was wine of a Yid that's being stored there. Some Rishonim Agayis here also, this was that there was wine of a Yid and a guy together there. So there was a guy that was found sitting between the barrels of wine. So again, the shaila came up whether this wine will be mutter or not. So here Rava says, and this is the svara that I mentioned before, that if this is a case where if the guy is going to touch this wine, then he'll be caught as a ganav, and he's afraid to be caught as a thief, then shari, then the wine is allowed. But v'iloi, if he's not afraid to be caught as a ganav, and the Rishonim give different examples. Let's say there's something that happened outside, there's something that caused him to come into this room, and he can excuse himself why he came in here, then aser. Then the wine will be aser, because then the excuse that the guy is giving is just an excuse, and now he has an opportunity to go and use this wine, and he doesn't even have to be afraid to be caught as a ganav. So therefore, in such a case, it will be aser. Another case that Rava Paskind, a fourth case, this next case here seems to be basically identical to the case before. There are actually some that say that only one of these stories you have to be guided in the Gemara. There's no reason to be guided. Both of these stories from the Lashon of Rashi. Also, it sounds like that he wasn't guided. This story that we just read, only the next one. Hahu Beise, there was this house, that there was wine being stored there, and there was a guy that was found sitting there between the barrels of wine. So Rava Paskin, if the guy can find a way to excuse what he's doing here, that he ran here near because of a danger or some kind of excuse that he has to be here, so then then the wine there will be aser, because then the guy is not afraid to pour from the wine for himself. But v'iloi, if he has no excuse, then chamre shari, the wine will be allowed because he's afraid to touch the wine, he'll be caught as a thief. Okay, so now in this concept of nitvas olav kaganev, which you see in both of these stories, the Gemara asks the question, Meisvei, the question was asked from the following Braise, going back to a similar case that we had before, when you had wine that was stored in a motel. So Nina ala pundik, if the door in the place where the wine is, in this motel, is locked, or the Yid tells the guy, Shmoyer, guard this wine for me, guard this room for me. Aser, so in this case, the wine will be aser. So why is it going to be aser? My love, don't you think the reason is, Avagav, the lesle lishtamuti, The Brisa doesn't make any distinction. So it seems that even in a case where the guy cannot give any excuse what it is that he's doing there, and nevertheless the wine is going to be aser. And we're not going to rely on this svara that Rava says that a guy is afraid to touch the wine of a yid because he doesn't want to be caught as a ganav. And according to this svara of Rava applies even in a case where the guy locks the door behind him, but if it's not his wine, the guy is still afraid of nitvasal of kaganav, and we rely that he's not going to touch it. But here in the Brisa says that if he's in this room where there's this wine, and there's no excuse that we're afraid that he touched the wine. So the Gemara says, Loi, it's not a raya against Rava, because we'll have to say, this Brisa is speaking only in a case where he's able to excuse why he entered there, and therefore we're afraid that he touched it, that's when it'll be aser. But otherwise, he's afraid to be caught, and we're not afraid that he touched the wine. Another case, Rava Paskin, Ahu Yisrael, V'Kechavim, there was a Yid and a guy together, they were sitting and drinking wine together. Shama Yisrael, Koil Tzluya Beknishte. Suddenly, the Yid hears from Shul the sound of the davening, and he realizes he's late for davening. Kom Vazel, he in a hurry gets up and runs to the Shul to go daven. And he left the wine there on the table with a guy sitting at the table. So Rava said about this, Chamre Shari. The wine that he left there is allowed. Because Meimar Amar, the guy says to himself that Hashta Mitkelele Chamre Vahadasi. The Yid will remember the wine that he left behind and he's going to come back for his wine. So the pshat in this is because the Yid left in a hurry. He heard the minyan. So the guy thinks to himself, why did the Yid leave in a hurry? Because he heard something and he ran out and he forgot about the wine that he left behind. And he's probably going to come back. He's going to realize that he forgot his wine, and he's going to come back to get his wine. Therefore, it's going to be mutter. Taisus here actually points out in one shot in Taisus that in the Mishnah it brought a case where the Yid and the guy was sitting by the table, and the Yid leaves. There, the Mishnah had said that the wine that's open on the table will be aser. The guy is sitting there at the table, and he feels free to take any wine on the table. So the wine on the table will be aser. Only wine that are left on the cupboards will be mutter. So according to one pshat, Taisa says here in the Gemara as well, only the wine on the table will not be mutter, because the guy feels very comfortable to pour himself from any of this wine. Another story that says the Gemara, there was a Yid and a guy that was sitting together on a boat, and this was on a Friday afternoon. Shama Yisrael, Kol Shipuri de Beishimshi. Suddenly the Yid hears the sound of the shofar. In the times of the Gemara, they had the sounds of the shofars that they would blow on Friday. Actually, there was a few different times in the day, and he hears the final blow of the shofar. That means that Shabbos is here. So Nafak, Vazal, the Yid in a hurry, gets up from the boat and leaves for Shabbos. And he left wine behind. Amar Rava, so Rava said about this case as well, that Chamre Shari, the wine will be allowed. Because here as well, Meimar Amar, the guy says to himself, Hashta mitgele lechamre v'hadasi. The Yid ran out in a hurry, and he probably forgot that he had wine here, and he's going to realize, and he's going to come back to get his wine. Now, says the Gemara, but seemingly in this case, the guy should know that it's Shabbos, and the Yid is not coming back so quickly. If you're going to say that since it's Shabbos, and the guy knows that he has a long period of time where the Yid is not going to show up again, and the Mefarshim point out that what we're talking about over here is a boat that's not docked properly near the shore, because if it is, then it's mutter on Shabbos to go onto the boat. We're talking about a boat that's further out, and there's an issue of Tchum Shabbos, where the Yid is not allowed to come back on Shabbos. So if so, why would the guy not feel comfortable pouring himself from the wine? Says the Gemara, but Ha'omar Rava said, that Amali Isser Giyera, Isser, which was a ger. So he told me the following, that Ki Avinu Bar Meyusan, before I was a ger, when I was still a guy, Amrinon, we would say to ourselves, Yehudoi Loi Menatri Shabbata. Look at the Yidden, they don't keep Shabbos properly. Because the Yidden Menatri Shabbata, if they would keep Shabbos properly, Kama Kisi Kamashtakchi B'Shukkah. We should find many different wallets of money that are left in the marketplaces by the Yidden, because we see the Yidden that sometimes get stuck in the marketplace very close to Shabbos. And what's the halacha if they're walking home and it's Shabbos? So the Goyim said to themselves, so then they have to empty their pockets. So why don't we find any wallets of Yidden on a Friday afternoon that the Yidden empty their pockets when Shabbos comes in? So this is the Goyim would say that this is a raya that the Yidden don't really keep properly Shabbos, and therefore the guy over here would sees the Yid that ran off the boat. He thinks that you see it even on Shabbos he may come back to the boat. But now the Gemara explains that v'lo yadane, or the ger say is that v'inu lo yadi, the guy did not know, or this Isra the ger, he said, and I didn't know then, the svirulon kerab Yitzchak, that in such a kind of case where a person finds himself on the road out of Shabbos and he has things in his pocket, he has money in his pocket, that we hold like what Rabbi Yitzchak says. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Al-Maitzikis b'Shabbos, person that finds a wallet of money on Shabbos, Mailichai, so that he can walk with it, Pachais medal ramis, as long as he stops less than the amount that you're not allowed to carry in a Shusarab on Shabbos, less than 4 amas, and this is how you could bring it home with you on Shabbos. So even though the Chatchila, this is something that you're not supposed to do on Shabbos, but in a case of B'diyevet, when a person is stuck coming before Shabbos, the Yid could bring it with him. That's the reason why the Goyim weren't finding any of these things in the marketplace. But you see here that the Goyim thought that Yidden don't keep Shabbos, and therefore if the Yid ran off the boat in a hurry and out of Shabbos, the guy is not comfortable pouring any wine for himself. He thinks that the Yid will show up again. Another case, says the Gemara, Hahu Arya. There was a lion, the Havanoim b'matzarta, that came outside of a wine press of a Yid, and the lion was roaring outside of the wine press. So Nashama Oivik the guy that's there heard this. Tasha Benidani, he ran inside the wine press and he hid between the barrels of wine. So in such a case, seemingly this is the ultimate case that we had before, that the guy has a perfect excuse what he's doing here between the barrels. He's not afraid to be caught there as a ganav, and therefore if he'll pour himself some wine, then he's not afraid that there's anything suspicious in his activity, that he's in this area, because the lion chased him in here. But so Rava said, no, the wine will be allowed. Because Meimer Omar, the guy says to himself, he's afraid to touch the wine. No, just like I'm hiding here between these barrels of wine, there's a Yid here in this wine press that's also hiding behind me somewhere. And therefore he's going to see what I'm doing. So this is it's going to be mutter as well. Zakta Gemara, another case, Hana Ganvi, there were these thieves, the Saliku, the Pumpadise. They came in the city of Pumpadise, Opascho Chavite Tuve, and they opened up many barrels of wine. Now the question is, who are these Ganovim? And they opened up these barrels of wine and they poured for themselves. So there's a big chash that this wine should be aser. Amarave, but Rava said about this, Chamra Shari, this wine will be mutter to drink from it. Why? Because my time, Ruba Ganvi Yisrael Nino. Most of the thieves are Ganovim. The statement of the Gemara doesn't mean most of the Ganovim in the world are Jews, but what it's saying is in Pumpadisa. In Pumpadisa, Gemara says this in a few places. In the city of Pumpadisa, most of the Ganovim there were Yidden, and therefore you see Ganovim that opened the barrels of wine, you can rely on the Raiv and the majority that it was Yidden that opened it, so there's no concern for Yayin Esach. Hahu of that, now there was a similar case that happened in Nerdoi, in the city of Nerdoi as well. Now in Nerdoi, over here, you can't rely on the same Raiv that Raiv Ganvi are Yisrael. So over here, when you see that barrels of wine were opened by thieves, l'chayre, here there's a big concern that this is Goyim and it should be Aser. Here it's a 50-50 suffix. It may be Ganovim Yidden, it may be Ganovim Goyim. But Shmuel, regarding this case as well, Shmuel said, Chamra Shari, that the wine will be mutter to drink from it. So the Gemara is going to try to explain there what's going on. Why in such a case where you can't rely on this Raiv, why should the wine be mutter? Says the Gemara, come on, according to who did Shmuel paskin this way? Rabbi Eliezer, is it according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer? The Amma, Rabbi Eliezer said that suffix bia, tahir, in a case where you have a suffix, whether there was an entrance at all into this area, and then it's going to be tahir. This is a halacha b'negei to a suffix of tumah and tara. What's the halacha? When any time you have a suffix of tumah and tara, the rule always is that if your suffix is in a Reshus HaRabim, then the suffix is going to be tahir. If your suffix is in a Reshus HaYachid, then the suffix is going to be tameh. And this is what's learned out from the Saita, that by a Saita, which is in a Reshus HaYachid, the suffix of the tumah of this Isha is tameh. So now there's a case though of suffix bia. Let's see what the case is, and from there you can learn out our case regarding the suffix with these barrels of wine here. So the Tran, we learned in the Mishnah, Hanichnas lebika b'yemoisa geshamim. A person entered into a big valley which has a lot of different fields in it, and each field is a separate field in this large valley. And he entered into this valley when in the winter time. Now the winter time is when the fields are planted and they're growing, and therefore people don't just trample all over these fields. And this time of the year, these fields have the din of a Reshus HaYachid. in the summer when it's not planted, so then many people walk through there, so it has a din of Rishus Harabim. But in the winter, it has a din of Rishus HaYachid. But now the case though is that V'tumeh B'sada Plainis, the entire Bika, all the fields in it are all area which is where you can walk there. There's no one buried there. But in one field, there's Tumah. There's one field that there are people that are buried there. Now, Va'ama, this person that entered into this valley says, Halachti b'makam alaz. Yes, I walked into this valley, but ve'eni yedeya im nechnasti lo yisasada. But I'm not sure that one field that has people buried there, I'm not sure if I entered into this field, or am lo nechnasti, or I did not enter into this field. So Rabbi Eliezer, regarding this case, Rabbi Eliezer said that Safik be tahir, even though it's a Rishus HaYachid. And by Rishus HaYachid, the halacha is any Safik will usually be tameh. But over here, the Safik is a much bigger Safik. The Safik is, did I Bechlal enter into that specific field where people are buried there? So if it's a Safik about whether I entered Bechlal, there, even in Rishus HaYachid, it will be tahir. Safik Maga. But if you walked into that place, into that field where the Tumah is, Elamaya Safik is whether you touched the Tumah that's present in that place or not, then Tumah. Then the person will be Tumah. This is similar to the way it is by the Saita. By the Saita, the man and the woman are in one place together, and there's a suffix whether he touched her. Over there, you say that misafik, the woman is going to be asr to her husband. And similar over here, if a person is in a place where he has a suffix, whether he touched the tumah that's present there, it's going to be asr. But if the suffix is a much more distant suffix, because he was in this general area of this valley, but you don't even know if he entered into that field where the tumah is, over here, Rabbi Eliezer says it's different, and it's going to be tahir. Okay, so we're learning this out from Saita, but the Gemara now wants to say that this also teaches a general concept that there's two different types of sfeikis. There's a suffix where it's more closer to where the source of the problem is, and then there's a suffix which is further, a suffix bia. That's a different nature of a suffix, and therefore over here we're going to be lenient about it. So the Gemara wants to suggest that this was the basis of Shmuel's Psak Din regarding these barrels of wine, because we see that there were thieves that opened up these barrels of wine, but we don't know who they were. It could be thieves that are Yidden or thieves that are Goyim. So it's a suffix whether these thieves that enter there were Goyim B'chlal. So this is a suffix bia, a suffix whether Goyim B'chlal enter there. That's the basis of Shmuel's Psak Din that he said that we're makel here as well and the wine will be mutter. But the Gemara says, no, that's not the basis. Shari Hasam, the case where Shmuel was matter regarding these barrels of wine that were opened is different. Because even according to the Chachamim that say suffix bia will be tamei, but in this case they'll paskin like Shmuel paskin that it's going to be mutter. Why? Because kivin the ikke the paschi l'shuma mayna. There are some thieves when they open the barrels of wine, they're not interested in the wine. They're interested in money because sometimes money is stored in these barrels. So therefore, havale svek sveke. So therefore, there's a double suffix here. There's a suffix whether a yid entered or the guy entered. And even if it's a guy that entered, he's not even looking for wine, b'chlal. He's looking for the money. And therefore, he didn't touch the wine. When he sees this wine, he says, forget about it. It's wine. He walks away. So therefore, in such a case, a svek, sveka, double suffix, that's the reason why Shmuel was matter to drink from this wine. Another case the Gemara brings that Rava Paskin, i.e. Revisa, there was this Goyish child, a girl, the Ishtakech, that was found, the Havas, Beni Dani, she was between the barrels of wine, and not only that, Vahavas Nikita Ofya Biyada. Her hands were dirty from the foam of the barrels of wine. When the barrels of wine are fermenting, so on the top of the barrel of wine you have bubbles and foaming, and you see that her hands were dirty from this. So she definitely touched the wine. So there's a concern that she touched the wine, and maybe she poured the wine, and it should be awesome. Amarave, so Rava says about this, Chamr Shari, this wine will be allowed. Why? Because Eimer, I will say that migabo de chavisa shaklase, that there was probably something that bubbled over, and from the outside of the walls of the barrel of the wine, that's where her hands became dirty with this foam of the wine. V'afal gav the lekesu, even if now you look at the outside of the barrel of the wine, you don't see any foam there, so it seems like she stuck her hands inside the barrel. But Eimer isramuye isramile, I'll still say that probably before there was foam, there was something outside of the barrel of wine that she touched, and that's what you're seeing. And we're not chayshish that she touched the wine itself inside. Rashi here says that this is only psak din with this kind of a leniency. In a case where it's a child, a child that doesn't know about yayin nesach, to pour wine for Avoda Zara. So therefore we're makel about this. It's Rashi's opinion. However, Taisva says that he not only been negate to a child, even been negate to an adult, where you see between the barrels and you see that it was dirty with the foam from the wine, will still say that he's afraid to really touch the wine and to use it and pour it for himself because of nitva salav kaganev, and therefore even there we're not going to be chayshish and the wine will be mutter. Another case the Gemara says that where there was a psak din, this is actually connected to the case before regarding where there was a gneva, and there's a shaila who the ganovim here wore. So who pulmisa? There was an army, a general with his whole army, the Salik Nerda. They came into the city of Nerda and Paschu Chavite Tuve, and they came and they opened many barrels of wine. So Ki Aser Avdimi, when Avdimi came, Avdimi actually came from Eretz Yisrael. He came to Bavel and he saw this story that happened in Nerda. So Amar, he said, Uvda Haven. There was a similar kind of case that happened. Kamei de Rabbi Lazar, in front of Rabbi Lazar, which is in Eretz Yisrael. This is Rabbi Lazar ben Padas. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan, and he was in Eretz Yisrael. In a similar kind of case where an army came into a city and they opened many barrels, and Vishara, and Rabbi Lazar there paskin that it's mutter. Now, but V'lo Yadaina, the Gemara says, he doesn't know what was the basis of the heter of Rabbi Lazar. Going back to the two stories that we had before, there was also a case of Ganovim that opened barrels of wines, and we had the psak din of Rava and the psak din of Shmuel. In the case of the psak din of Rava, then he paskin that there was mutter, it was based on Raiv, because most of the Ganovim are Yidden. The psak din of Shmuel was based on something else, Svek Sveke. So now here the Gemara says that he said, I don't know what the basis of the psak din of Rabbi Lazar was. What is it based on what the Gemara quoted before in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, the Amar Safik Biyatar, that in a case where it's a Safik, whether you entered into this area, into this field of Tumeh, then in such a kind of Safik, we say that it's Tar. And therefore over here as well, I can say that this army that came into the city in Eretz Yisrael, talking about an army in Eretz Yisrael, I say that I don't know who this army is. Maybe this army could be Yidden, it could be Goyim. So it's a suffix who entered over here. And the same thing also in the city of Nerda. This army could be Yidden, it could be Goyim, and that was the basis maybe to say that over here it should be Tared as well. Or maybe the reason is different. Mishum de Savar, because in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Lazar held, Rube the Ozli, Bahadi Pomis Yisrael Mino, that most of the ones that are going together with the general in the army, they're mostly Yidden. So over there, he was relying on Roiv, not just relying on this, there was a suffix, and that the nature of the suffix is a suffix bia. No. It was actually Roiv Yidden, and it's just like the psak din of Rava before by Roiv Gamvi, that most of the thieves are and Pumpadisa are Yidden. Over here as well in Eretz Yisrael, most of them are Yidden. That's what the basis of Rabbi Lazar's psak din is. Okay, so now based on this, the Gemara comes back now. That's what Rabbi Lazar paskin in Eretz Yisrael. Now the question is how this applies here in Nerda, in Bavel. So ihachi, if so, there are some actually that are not good as this ihachi. But the Gemara now says regarding Bavel, in the case here in Bavel in Nerda, suffix bia. You're going to say that this case is a suffix bia. If you're going to say that in Eretz Yisrael, the psak din of Rabbi Lazar was based on the fact that this army with the general could be all Yidden, and it's a suffix, whether there's even Goyim Bechlal that entered here. But over here in Babel, though, Safik Magahu, it's not a Safik Bia, it's a Safik Maga. Why is it? It's a Safik who touched the wine. Why? Because over here in Erda, the army that entered is definitely mostly Goyim. And therefore, in such a case, we know that Goyim entered and they opened up the barrels. But the question is whether they touched the wine or not. So there's you can't rely on Roiv being Yisrael. It's mostly Goyim, so your only suffix is whether they touched it or not. So regarding such a case, you should be machmer. If the Goyim were there themselves and they opened up these barrels. So the Gemara answers, no, there's actually a reason to be makel here in this case as well. Why? Because Kivin, the Maftechi Tuve, what did they observe here? What did this army do when they opened up these barrels of wine? They didn't open up just a few barrels. They opened up many barrels of wine, much more than what they would need to drink. So over here, we go back to the other svara that the Gemara mentioned before. So Eimeh, I could say that Adaita the Mamayna Pascho, that they opened up these barrels thinking that they're going to find money over here. Oh, and the Gemara here actually says, Okisafik biye dami. And therefore it now becomes similar to the suffix when there's a suffix whether anyone Bechlal entered into this area or not. Okay, the Gemara here could have said that this is a suffix Sfek Sveike. Well, apparently the Gemara is not relying on Sfek Sveike because we know that it's going. We know that it's going that entered. Elamai, the suffix is whether they touch the wine or not. But the Gemara is saying, even though it's a suffix whether they touch the wine or not, but because from what we observed that they opened many, many different barrels, we could see that they're looking for money. If they would be looking for wine, they would open 2-3 barrels. So they're looking for money, so this is considered to be similar to the concept of suffix bia. As I explained before, suffix bia means it's a kind of suffix where it's a much more distant possibility that you actually came into a problem. So here as well, in the case where you see that they're looking for money, it's similar to suffix bia, that it's a small chance that they're looking for wine, and therefore we're going to be mata this wine.
They're looking for money in these wine barrels.
Apparently, money was stored in wine barrels as well. That was a good place to. He says a kasha for Maisa. That's a good place for money to be stored.
Okay.
Another case, Dr. Gemara, Hahu Misuvisa. There was this woman that was selling wine. Rashi says the term Misuvisa comes from the term Zailul V'Saive. Saive means someone that drinks a lot of wine. So she was selling wine. The Masrala Aklida, it says here in the Gemara Maftecha as well, the Bach takes it out. She gave over her keys to her Gaish helper, a woman, a cleaning lady. She gave her the keys. So what's the halach here? Now she has the keys for the room where the wine is. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Lazar. So he paskin and said, Uvda have be medrasha. So Rabbi Lazar said that this kind of a case came up in the Bismedrash. V'amru, and they said that it's not a problem because le'masrala elo shmiras mafteach bovad. He's not giving her the keys in order to enter into the room. He's giving her the keys just to hold on to the keys until she'll need the keys back, but with no permission at all to enter into the room. And therefore, even though she has the keys, we go back to the svara that we said before, nitvesal of kagana, if she's afraid to go into the room without permission of her boss, and so there's no concern that she touched the wine. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says about this, Afanan nami tainina. We learned this also in a Mishnah. The Mishnah says regarding a case where a person is storing things that are tahir. He gave the keys to this room where you have produce that's tahir being stored there, and he gives it to an amaretz which is suspected of being tummy. But nevertheless, tarais of tahiris, whatever you are storing there is still going to be pure. Giving the key, it does not mean that you gave him permission to enter. You just gave him the key to hold on to. So Abaye commented about this. So hashte tarais of tahiris. If regarding a case where there would be a concern that maybe he walked in and he was metame things that were tar over there, if we paskin that it's still pure, yayin nesach miboye. Needless to say, when it comes to yayin nesach, that we rely on the same svara that the keys were just given to watch the keys, but not with any permission to enter, and therefore it's going to be mutter. But now the Gemara says, based on this last point here, that what Abaye said, Lememre, shall we say, the taris, alimi miyayin, that our concern regarding taris is something which is stronger, or more machmer, when it comes to things that have to be kept pure, even more machmer than miyayin nesach, even more than yayin nesach. These are both things that are chumras midrabanan. The chumra of amaretz that may have touched things that are kept pure, and the same thing here regarding the yayin nesach. It's a chumra midrabanan of the stam yenum, of a place where a guy enters and pours wine for himself. So, are we going to say, is what Abaye is saying true, that by taris there's a stronger concern for this? So the Gemara says, the taris were more machmer regarding taris. Because the itmer, as we learned this, there's a machlekes actually about this. Chotzer, when there's a courtyard, that's all one large courtyard. But shecholka b'misipis. But it was divided with this small divider, a very small, low divider between two people in this courtyard, a yid and that's a chaver, someone that has things that are tired, and on the other side is an amaretz. But it doesn't really have a very good divider, and it's all one big courtyard. Amar Rav, so Rav says about this, tarais of tmeis. In such a case, it doesn't have a good divider, and there's an amaretz living on the other side, so things that he's keeping there that are tired, there's a concern that the amaretz touched it, and it'll all be tummy. Now, but if on the other side of the divider it's a guy that's living there, we're not concerned that the guy touched it, that it should be yayin nesach. Again, the guy is afraid that he'll be caught as a ganev, so we clearly see here that according to Rav, that regarding taris, we're more machmer. Now, Rav Yechanan, however, Rav Yechanan actually says that they're the same. After Reisav Tahiris, just like regarding the Ayin Nesach, we're not concerned that the guy touched it. Regarding the Amaretz touching the produce that's tied on the other side of the divider, we're not concerned, and it's all going to be tied. Okay, so here the Gemara, since it brought up this machlokes, we'll bring from a few different prices a discussion, questions on Rav and Rabbi Yechanan, whether we're machmer regarding the taris or not. Rav says by taris we're more machmer. So Meisvei, the Gemara asks on Rav, it says in a brayse, what happens when you have two courtyards? This is not one courtyard, these are two courtyards, and they're both off of the Rishus HaRabim. There's the outside courtyard, and then you walk through it, you go further inside, there's a second courtyard inside. So now the inner courtyard is owned by a chaver, person that has taris and is trusted with it. And the outside courtyard, shalam haaretz, is an haaretz. So the person, the haaretz, he doesn't really have any business walking in the inner courtyard where the chaver lives. The chaver has to walk through his courtyard to get inside, but the haaretz has no business being there. So I say chaver, so the chaver that lives in the inner courtyard, shetech sham peres, he can spread out his produce there. Or maniach sham kelim, he can leave his vessels there, and he doesn't have to be concerned that the haaretz will touch it. Even if it's easy for the hand of the haaretz to reach into the courtyard of the chaver that's on the inner courtyard. And in this case, it's different than the previous case. Here, it doesn't say about any divider. There was no divider between these two courtyards. But at the same time, though, here it's two different courtyards. So it says that there's no concern. Says the Gemara, Kashil Rav. This is a question for Rav that said that when there's one courtyard and there's a divider, that there is a concern that the haaretz will touch. Amalach Rav, so Rav will answer you, it's not the same thing. Shani Hossam, Shanit Vesolav Kaganev. In this case, it's two different courtyards. True, there's no divider between them, but it's two distinct properties. So the haaretz is going to be afraid to just walk into the courtyard of the chaver, and therefore he can spread out his stuff, and the haaretz has no business going there. Tashma, the Gemara asks and brings a raya from another case, a braise. This is a question of Rabbi Yechanan that said that by the taris we are going to be mekel. We're not concerned. So Rav Shimon Gamliel says, Gagai Chaver. So you have rooftops where also things are kept there. So you have the rooftop of the chaver. And Lamaila Migaga Shalam Haaretz. His rooftop is higher up, right near the roof of the Haaretz, lower down. So Oisa Chaver, Shetech Sham Peiris. So the chaver can spread out his fruits there, or maniach sham kelim, and he can put his kelim there as well. But ulbulvat shaloi tehei yodish al haaretz magas sham. Only if there's some distance between the rooftop of the haaretz to the chaver that his hands can't reach there. So we see here that we are concerned that the haaretz will stretch out his hands and take a touch. So Rabbi Yechanan says that when you have these one courtyard with a little divider in between, even though he could easily stretch out his hand, it's not a problem. So Kashil Rabbi Yechanan, this brayse is a question of Rabbi Yechanan's opinion. So Rabbi Yechanan will answer you. Shani Hassam, in this case of the two rooftops here, it's different because the case here is that the courtyard of the chaver is a little bit higher up, and therefore over here, if the haaretz touches things in the chaver's rooftop, he can excuse himself because Meimer Omar he'll say Imtsuri kam memtzere. I was just stretching out my hands. I was picking up my hands. He's stretching out his hands, and it just ends up being higher up near the chaver's rooftop, and his hands reach in there very easily, and he doesn't even have to bend down. If you have two courtyards together, or one courtyard where it's the same level, he has to bend down to touch the produce. But over here, he doesn't have to bend down. It's very easy. So over here, we are going to be concerned, even according to Rav Yechanan. The last case the Gemara brings, to ask on Rav, Toshama, there's another brayse where it says, Gagei Shachover, Bitzad Gagei Shalam Haaretz, the two rooftops, the same level, the chaver right near the rooftop of the haaretz. So Oisa chaver shetech sham peiris and meniach sham kelim. The chaver could spread out his fruits and put his vessels there. V'afal pisha yodish al haaretz megas sham. Even if the hands of the haaretz could easily reach there. We're not talking about a case where it's higher up. It's all in the same level, and it can reach there. It's not a problem. So Kashil Rav, this is a question on Rav that says that when you have one courtyard with this little divider between them, that we are concerned that he's going to touch this. So Rav answers you that this brayse is arguing with the Rav Shimon Gamliel that was brought in the previous brayse. So Rav, Isn't it true that Ikir, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, that I have what we learned in the previous Braisa, which is Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, the Koi Kavasi, and he is, like my opinion, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says that we're not concerned. So Ana, the Omri, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Rav says, I follow like the opinion of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, that we're concerned that the guy will touch it. And in this Braisa that says that we're not concerned, that's arguing on the previous Braisa. So therefore Rav is machmer like the opinion of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel.